Hello, I'm Hunter Cook, and today we're going to be doing the second episode of Forwritten Fruit. I have with me Joshua Grasso, Dr. Joshua Grasso.
Get it right.
You earned that degree.
It's okay. Josh is fine.
And we're going to be talking about his writing and who he is. So give us a little brief overview as you as a person and, kind of stuff that you've done.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, I'm a professor of English here at East Central University. And as a writer, I've been writing like forever. But I only became a really serious writer after I became a professor and started teaching here at East Central University. Because a lot of the stuff I wrote before was just kind of a mishmash. It was a little bit of this, a little bit of that. When I became a professor, I kind of got confident and I got a degree. I kind of know what I'm doing. Wouldn't it be cool to actually know what I'm doing in writing? So shortly after, I would say maybe about 2008, I said, I'm going to take writing as seriously as I took getting my PhD. So I almost made like courses for myself. I'm going to learn how to write a short story. I'm going to learn how to write a novel. And I spent years just kind of writing story after story and even novel after novel, trying to teach myself, at least for me, how to do it well. And am I doing it well? I don't know, but I've definitely got better. So what I do now is basically I consider myself a short story writer. I write a lot of what's called speculative fiction, so a lot of science fiction and fantasy stories, all across the gamut, from stories that have wizards and space to ones that are set in the normal day that just have a little bit of elements of both. And I write kind of a bunch of kind of fantasy novels, a little bit more geared towards young adult and even middle grade stuff. And I've just tried to get good in those two fields because I think that complements a lot of the books and the classes I teach, because a lot of my stories actually come out of classes I teach. Yeah, so that's kind of where I am. I kind of constantly am drawing from my teaching in my writing. And then my writing inspires my teaching. So so they've built on each other.
Well, they always say to write what you know.
Exactly, so this is what I know.
Yeah.
I know everything I teach.
So you said that you kind of tried to teach yourself how to become a novelist. What did that process look like?
Well, really, just writing a bunch of novels. I mean, obviously, I'd read so many novels. And, I've always loved young adult literature. I've always loved children's literature throughout, going back to the 19th century. That's always been a great love of mine because one of my favorite books of all time is The Hobbit. And that's a book I read when I was young and I continue to read over and over again. So one of my dreams is I wanted to write like a really, really good novel kind of geared towards somewhere between 10 and 15. I love that age. An age where kids are just starting to really read seriously and really finding their way with books. So my goal is to always write a book that kind of creates that bridge for them. So that's what I'm ultimately trying to do. But it's harder than it looks. So I reread a lot of my classic favorite kind of kids books and young adult books and middle grade books. And even some picture books, frankly, trying to say, okay, I'm going to write that novel. And what I did is I literally wrote about 5 or 6 books, and some were longer than others, trying to figure out how do you do it? Because the only way to do it is to figure it out is to do it. And I made a lot of mistakes, and I wrote a lot of books that obviously aren't that good. But I started to figure out what didn't work when I reread them and revised them, and what I wanted to do more of, and then what I wanted to do better. So really, the only way to be a writer is really just to practice, and practice a lot, but then to be very self-critical and say, okay, I'm a reader now. What is not good about this book? Or what do I wish would happen? Yeah.
That's what I like to do. I like to read my work and then go, this is something that I'm bad at. This is something that I'm bad at. So the next thing that I write, I want to focus on this. Like the first novel I ever wrote, I never finished or did anything with. And when I read through it, I was like, the 3 things that I'm bad at: characterization, dialogue, and pacing. And so the next thing I wrote, I was like, I'm going to make sure this novel has a lot of really distinct characters, has a lot of dialogue, and has really strict pacing.
Right.
And I worked on that throughout the entirety of it, and I got better and better and better as I went. So I think you're right. I think the best way to do it is to figure out what your weaknesses are and then try and turn those into more strengths.
Right.
So what draws you to fantasy and sci-fi, do you think?
I mean, mostly my childhood, because that's what I first woke up in. I mean, the first work of art that really inspired me to look towards literature and reading and all that was Star Wars. I encountered Star Wars when I was 2 or 3 years old, before I could even understand it. And Star Wars has always been a big part of my life, as you can see from my office. But it brought me to The Hobbit. and it brought me to fantasy literature and science fiction literature and regular literature. So it's been a really important part of my childhood, but more importantly, I think it's very metaphorical fantasy and science fiction. It's literature that opens up very easily. It's something that you can appreciate it for the story and the characters when you're young, and as you get older, you realize it opens it up and it points to a lot of different experiences. Because fantasy doesn't exist. There's no fantasy world. There's no Narnia. There's no Middle Earth. These places don't exist. They're only important in how they point you towards ideas in the real world. And the same with science fiction. There is no future. The future doesn't exist. It's just a metaphor for where we are now. It's a way of looking at the world today by looking at some kind of hypothetical future. So I love allegory, and I love that fantasy and science fiction are very allegorical. And I think it's important for kids especially, or young readers, to read allegory because it opens up possibilities. It shows you that it's not just about this story. You can start to relate this story to your own life and even growing up and things like that. So I just love the allegorical and metaphorical nature of these two genres.
Yeah, Star Wars is a good example of that too. Mm-hmm. It's very good versus evil allegory for growth and suffering and suffering through, or growing through suffering and suffering through growth and things. It's a very theme heavy story, and I think that, like you said, the first bit of media that you consume really affects how you write and how you think as a person. Like, I grew up watching Spectacular Spider-Man and Ben 10 and superhero shows, and so I'm just obsessed with that kind of thing. And I think it influences you for the rest of your life. So, you're a teacher. Obviously you think that teaching affects your writing, and your writing affects your teaching, and that affects your life. What got you into being a teacher?
Oh, that's interesting. So I always just wanted to be a writer. I never wanted to be a teacher. I was very shy. I'm still very introverted. I didn't think I could ever walk in front of a classroom and teach. It wasn't something in me. But in undergraduate, I started acting, and that's a whole story. I don't know how I got involved in acting, because that's also something I didn't think I could do. But I ended up really liking it. I wasn't necessarily good at acting, but I liked the experience. I liked collaborating with other people. So that got me thinking, I wonder if I could be a teacher, because I didn't find that so hard. But I kind of put it away, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do it. So I didn't do it. I got other jobs. But later, when I ended up going back to grad school, you have to teach as part of your grad school stipend. Like, when you go to grad school, they pay you money, and in return for that money, you have to teach a few classes. So I was stuck. I had to try it. The very first class I ever taught, I remember it. It felt like nothing I'd ever experienced. I was like, this is the greatest feeling on earth. And I didn't even know what I was doing. But I just loved the idea, not of being in command, not of telling people what to do or telling them right or wrong. I just loved that I was having a conversation with strangers. And like when you meet a stranger today, it's reduced to small talk. Yeah. It might take weeks to get to something deep. In a classroom, you go in a classroom with strangers and you're immediately talking at a higher level. You get to talk. You can throw small talk out the window, and you can just have meaningful conversations immediately. You don't get to do that anywhere else. And I love that. And I was like, I want to do more of that, because I'm shy. I don't know how to do all the small talk really well. I know how to talk about big ideas, and I know how to just be honest. And I just love that about teaching. I get to talk to people on a real level without all the nonsense. So I was hooked. And I just wanted to get better at doing that and making students feel comfortable doing it. So that's why I love teaching. And even to this day, it's still why I love it.
And as much as you don't like the authority part of it, I think that is part of why the classroom is the kind of social ecosystem that you're describing. Yeah. Is because students are there with the implication that they're going to learn something from someone else. Right. And so there's that implicit trust between you and them. Right. Which isn't always there, obviously.
No. But you're right. It's built in, so that's what makes them go, okay, we can go right to this. But you still have to make them trust you. Yeah.
What do you think about the students that come to you with writing advice? Well,
I love it, because I didn't get any writing advice. When I was an undergraduate, it was very different. I went to a school, I went to a school where professors didn't really, I don't know if it was a different age or just a school, but like in the 90s, when you went to your professor, they didn't have a lot to say to you. They didn't have a lot to talk. They didn't want to really share much with you. It was very businessy. So I couldn't go to a professor and say, hey, I'm writing a novel. Do you have any advice? I think they would just say I'm busy. So I didn't get any really good advice. So I think what I like about this is I can tell them, okay, these are all the things that didn't work for me. This is what I've learned after 30 years. So here. So I love that I can help people, give them some shortcuts, because all I got was long cuts, right? All people told me is just go write. And that is good advice, but it would be nice to say, well, keep writing, but look out for this. So I love to give any tips of the trade that I've learned, because they're sometimes very hard to come by.
What do you think the most common mistakes you see in students, like early writers?
Oh, yeah. The most common mistake, I think, is a student who's a new writer immediately say, okay, I haven't written much, I'm going to write a novel, right? Or not even that. I've had students who say, I'm writing a trilogy of novels. It's like, have you written much? No, but I've got this whole trilogy mapped out. Thinking too big at first, I think, is just a flaw, because the chances of you finishing one novel, let alone 3, right off the bat, is low. And also, should you? I mean, why not start small? It's like, work your way up, work your confidence up, right? Walk before you run. So I always think, to me, a short story is much harder in a weird way to write than a novel, because a novel is hard to pull off, but it's so big. So you can just keep writing and writing and writing, because you're like, I have to get to page 400, right? So you can put anything in a novel. A short story is hard because at a certain point it gets flabby. At a certain point, it's like, where is this going? Once you go past page 20, people are starting to scratch their heads. So I would always say, start small. Try to write a few good short stories, because that will teach you to be a more concise and economical, if you really want to be a novelist. It'll teach you how to not to just write anything. It'll teach you to kind of think about pacing and story and characters and when things need to happen. So again, the biggest thing I see is students who are trying to be way too ambitious because they don't really know what it means to write a story. And I think starting small with a story, a poem, or anything like that, it just kind of teaches you, like, what are you trying to do? Because even a novel that's 1,000 pages, let's say, it's still a very simple story. It can be boiled down into a story that you could tell probably in 2 pages in an outline, right? Yeah. So that's the problem. Every story is intrinsically very concise. What makes it long is the development of characters, themes, the world, and all that stuff. And you can't really do that unless you really, really know that essence of the story. And I think people who've never written small have trouble writing large.
I could see that. I think it's funny that you mention the mistake you see is they immediately jump into wanting to write a novel, which is exactly what I did.
Well, I did it too, but and it's because we read novels, so we assume that's what you write. Yeah. And I, as a teenager, I immediately started to write a novel, right? Yeah, and it's because it's what we love, it's what we read, but it doesn't mean that's how you have to start.
Yeah, that's true. Starting small is better. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there are people who are really good at writing short stories, and there's people who are really good at writing novels that are terrible at short stories.
Oh, of course. I mean, really, it's hard to be good at both. Yeah. But that's the thing. Even if you aren't good, in quotes, at writing a short story, and you don't want to, you should still start there. You don't have to be good at it. It's still good training. Yeah, right?
I agree. I think you're absolutely right, though, about short stories being like a hard balance to strike. Yeah. Because you don't want to make it too short, because then you're not leaving your audience with enough. But if you make it too long, is it even really a short story at this point? And that middle ground is really hard to find, because it's hard to write that length and give your audience enough and also not flow it with information.
Oh, it's true. But honestly, once around, because I wrote all these different novels, and I thought I was getting better at writing them, but they were kind of getting longer because I got more comfortable in writing novels, so they just kept getting longer. But around 2016, I started reading a lot more stories again, and I'm like, you know what? I need to start writing some stories, because I never write short stories. So I said, I'm going to write 20 short stories, and I'm going to try to get really good at it. But after the 20, that was only scratching the surface. I'm like, oh, now I know how to write a story after 20. So I said, okay, I'm going to write 40. And I've written over 100 now. But what's interesting is I wrote about maybe 60. And, not all of them are good. Some of them are just kind of like exercises. Some of them, couldn't see the light of day. But I just had all these ideas. But after about the 60th, I said, okay, I'm going to try another novel again. It was a totally different novel. It really changed the way I looked at writing and looked at writing a longer work. And that next novel, even though it was still pretty long, is super concise. I don't think there's any flab in it. And it has more of a purpose. When you read it, it seems like it's always going somewhere. And I think stories really taught me a lot about pacing and character and when things need to happen and how to keep things moving. Whereas before, I just kind of took my time and I was like, oh, I don't have any ideas. Well, I guess I'll do this, right? I would like put things in. I would constantly be going on all these diversions here and there. And it's like, there's no point in doing that, right? And I did it just because I didn't know what else to write. So how about this? How about that? After writing short stories, I'm like, no, that has nothing to do with the story. You will not put that in. Or when I saw it in a revision, I'm like, that goes out. So it really helped me write a longer work. And in fact, the last novel, I just finished a novel last summer. It's actually one of my longest novels ever. But it's also, I think, very concise in a weird way. And the stories helped me do that.
It helps you filter out the fluff and the filler.
Yeah, and it just helps you. I look at every novel like a short story now, even though it's long. Because a short story isn't short, and a novel isn't long. Length has nothing to do with it. It's how you tell a story. And a story is long only because the story you're following keeps going in different directions. So really, the longest story can be very short. And the shortest story can be very long in a weird way. So that's what length is an illusion, and I think people get confused by that. They're like, oh, a novel's so hard to write because I have to make it long. It doesn't have to be long, and if it feels long, you failed, right? And also a short story. If a short story feels too short or too long, you've also failed. Yeah.
I've definitely read books that were pretty long that I just flew through in a day.
Because exactly.
It was great. The Stand is a good one like that. Yes, I flew right through The Stand, and that's like a 1,000-page book. Mm-hmm. Whereas I've read some short stories where it took me a while.
Yeah, right.
I probably spent more time reading those short stories than I did The Stand, honestly. Yeah. But, you're right. Length is an illusion.
It is an illusion. And King is a great example. Stephen King is a master short story writer. He wrote he still writes tons of short stories. His novels read like short stories, right? Because they're quick, they're punchy, but they have great character development. I think he learned to write novels from writing short stories because he wrote tons of stories that he published in magazines when he was in high school and even in college before he really went on to write like Carrie and things like that.
He also is really good at spitting work out at 1,000 miles.
He is. He's a workaholic. He is. But you'll notice if you look back, most of his novels are actually based on a short story. Yeah. Like Carrie was a short story. The Stand was a short story. I mean, a lot of them. Pet Sematary and Salem's Lot. These were all short stories that he later saw a larger story in. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's interesting. He often took a short story and made it into a novel. So in a weird way, I think I learned from him. I think it's a good way to do that. Even if you don't want to be a short story writer, try writing the discipline of writing something, or even forget short stories, flash fiction. That's a great discipline too. If you look at flash fiction, a lot of those flash fiction like magazines or e-zines, they're like, you can only write 1,000 words. Now, most people is like, that's impossible. You can't write a story in 1,000 words. And I'll agree, it is almost impossible. But I've written a lot of flash fiction, and I don't really like it, but it's a great discipline because it really makes you cut to the bare bones. Yeah. And it's easier to expand than to cut. But it's a cool exercise. So even if you don't want to be a flash fiction writer, because I don't even like reading it, but it's a good exercise.
Yeah. It's good to train yourself not to put in filler. Yes. Because filler is just pointless and it detracts from your story. Do you have a process for coming up with stories or writing stories? So describe that process.
Yeah, so it's very vacuous. I never work with outlines. I don't like to plan too much, but it's the same in my classes. What I do is I come up with a rough kind of, not even an outline, I come up with a sketch. I come up, when I'm writing a story, I come up with a few ideas. I have a premise. I'm like, here's what I think could happen. This is how I kind of want it to start. And here's some characters that could be in it. And I think it might go here. And that is it. I write maybe a paragraph, maybe a page of where I think it's going to go. this finished story or novel never resembles what I put on the page. It just gets me started. There's something that has to excite me, and then that will get me going. But it's the same when in my classes, I will do like a rough sketch of like, here's some ideas I want to talk about. Here's some page numbers I want to talk about. But I leave it open because I want to walk in class and I want the discussion to flesh out the class. And in writing, I want the writing to flesh out the story. Because I worry that if I come in here with a really strict outline, this has to happen, then this has to happen, there's no room for magic. I'm just being a transcriptionist then. Yeah. And I don't want that to happen. So much of writing for me is spontaneity and improvisation. Yeah. And I want that to happen. So I go in with a bare amount. You have to go in with a little, but I go in with a bare amount, and then I bump into some story element. I'm like, oh, no, forget that. Here's the story. Like I just finished a story a few weeks ago, and the idea I had for the story came from an in-class writing prompt I gave in one of my classes. Because I started doing the prompt, and I'm like, oh, wow, that could be a really cool idea for a story. But so I started writing the story, and it has nothing to do with that at all, not even at all. Because I literally, in writing the introduction, I introduced a character that wasn't part of my little scenario. And I'm like, no, I love this character. That's the story. And the whole story then suddenly focused around this girl in the story, and that changed the entire story. I threw out my old idea, and I suddenly realized, oh, if it's about her, then this has to happen. Oh, it's a different story. And the story became more interesting and more emotional because I found the character. And to me, you can't really write any story until you find a few characters that you connect with. And it's hard to do that in an outline because you don't really know them. To know a character, you have to start writing, to me. That's how it works for me. So yeah, I go in with a sketch and I flesh it out.
I'm very similar in that what I do is I make an outline and I break it up into sections and I go, this is the conflict that will occur in this section. Mm-hmm. This is the conflict here. This is the character change that will occur. So I know my beginning of each section and the end, and thus like the beginning of the story and the end and where I want the characters to go. Mm-hmm. And then from there I just write from that point to the next point and I come up with basically how that occurs on the fly. And I've had points where I've come up with characters and I was like, oh, that's awesome.
right.
That's it. We'll go this route for a while. Like when I wrote my novel that's on Forwritten right now, about halfway through, I came up with these 3 characters, and they didn't even have names at first. They were supposed to be just background goons. Mm-hmm. And then as I wrote them, I started having more fun writing them than I did like any other part of the scene.
Right.
And then when the next few sections of the story come along, I make them like a pivotal part of the story, and it changed like the second half of the novel itself. Just because I was sucked into how I wrote these characters.
Right.
You can come up with some really amazing things on the fly.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So tell me about your upbringing and how that might have affected your stories. Beyond just like Star Wars and things like that, but your life in general.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I don't think my upbringing... The only way my upbringing might have influenced my writing is that I was an only child. I was kind of a lonely kid. I was born in New York, like Long Island, New York. And very early on, when I was like 4 or 5, we got uprooted to Atlanta, Georgia. So I was always, even though I kind of grew up in Atlanta, I was always someone who was an outsider. Like I didn't belong there. I didn't speak like other people. Other people knew I was a little different. And even though they knew me because I went to school with them since kindergarten, I always felt I was a little different. So I was never like super popular in that way because I was the kid who had the funny accent. So I think it just made me drew me more inward. So I started writing and reading probably more than the average kid, right? Because that was just a world that accepted me and understood me. So I've always been someone who spends a lot of time alone and in my head. And that's really conducive to being a writer. To being a writer, you have to spend a lot of time in front of the computer or in front of a pad. And a lot of people who are very extroverted don't like that element of it because it's isolating. You have to be alone. And I'm very comfortable being alone. I can be alone for days on end. And eventually I like some, participation with the world, but then I want to get back into the room and be alone. So to me, writing is solitary, so you got to feel comfortable with it. So I guess my upbringing helped me be very comfortable with it.
Which is ironic because it's like writing professionally. is two very conflicting skill sets, because in order to be really into writing and spending that amount of time in your head, you're gonna have to be introverted or a little bit of an outsider. I know lots of writers, and I feel like that's a pretty consistent theme.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of writers feel like outsiders. They feel detached from others, and they use that to spend time thinking about stuff. But then, like, the professional aspect of writing, like getting traditionally published, finding a literary agent, presenting your work to people at like poetry readings and things like that, is a very extroverted skill.
It is, yeah.
And so it's two very conflicting worlds, two very conflicting skill sets that do not complement each other at all. But the professional aspect of the craft kind of forces you to have those.
Yeah, it's true. It's very weird.
Which is why I think a lot of early writers fail. Is because they're not the kind of person that sends 50 emails to literary agents and gets rejection after rejection. At least that was my experience.
No, exactly, yeah.
I think I sent 28 emails to literary agents before I finally quit. And maybe a handful of them responded at all.
Right.
One of them responded with 6 words.
Yeah.
That was my favorite email. It just said, "Wow, that's a long book." Nothing else.
Oh, wow.
What a great guy. I'm a big fan of that email.
Yeah.
I use it in every presentation I give about my writing. But I agree. I think a lot of writers are introverted, and I feel like a lot of them feel like they're outsiders. And which isn't to say that people who don't feel that way can't be writers,
or
even
at all.
Great writers. I'm sure there's a lot of really great. Probably the ones that get published are the ones that are extroverted.
Ironically, I think the best teachers are actually introverts at heart, because people who are very extroverted, it's hard to say. You have to kind of you have to have a different persona when you teach or when you present your writing. You can't always just be you. I think extroverts are always kind of up there and out there, and they don't know how to dial back or change sometimes. And I think introverts, when you go into a classroom or you go to read your writing, you have to be a different person, because your person is hiding, right? You want to hide and be quiet. So you have to figure out, how do I reinvent myself? I think every career makes you reinvent yourself in some way. You have to develop another persona. So I think what's interesting is that sometimes extroverts have trouble doing that. I just think, for me as an introvert, it helped me be a teacher, because I had to dial up. I had to figure out, who can I be to do this? And I think sometimes extroverts assume that because it's so easy to talk to people, they can just be themselves. And every new world you go into requires a slight, not personality change, but a persona change. So I think, in a way, being an introvert is an advantage, because I have to be someone different, right? And I think that's helped me. Even when I read my writing, I'm a larger version of myself. I can be more dramatic. I can do things I would never normally do, because I know that that's required. And same in class. That's not me. It's a version of me, but it's not the normal me, because I know that I can't be that person there.
It's a performance.
It's a performance, right? And that's the thing. Being an introvert, everything's a performance, because even going outside is a performance.
Yeah.
Right?
No.
So it just helps you realize that. And sometimes extroverts assume I can be the same everywhere. And that never works. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, not necessarily hiding from people, but knowing that every social interaction is kind of like a game. That's a very introverted thing, and I think that really does help people be able to switch gears like that.
Yeah.
Especially in writing, where you are essentially having to form the thoughts of a completely different person, or as close to that as you can approximate. And that's a performance in of itself. Writing is as much performance as teaching or acting on stage.
It totally is, yeah.
It's telling the story to an audience. It's just you can't see your audience, which makes it more comfortable, I guess. I don't know. It's scarier.
It's all
sometimes.
Everything is scary. Teaching is scary. Writing is scary, because when you teach, you're like, what if this class goes terribly? What if no one answers me? What if they think I'm a fraud? Every time I sit down to write, it's like, what if I can't put a sentence together? What if I can't write stories anymore? What if this is the worst thing I've ever written? I mean, everything has that terrible, possibility of failure. But that's also what's exciting about it.
Yeah.
It's like, can I make it not happen? Can I make this class work? Can I make this story work? So rescuing something from the jaws of defeat is its own reward. It's cool. Yeah.
That's another common thing I've encountered with writers, is that fear that you're writing into a void.
Mm-hmm.
That because you're starting out, so you don't have as much of an audience or any audience. You've never been published, self or traditional or otherwise, and so it really sucks the ambition out of you after a while. And I think that's why a lot of people don't finish novels.
Right.
Is because they don't have friends that they can share with it, that care, and they don't have a place where they can put it, where people will read it. And so they get part way through a novel, and then just all that motivation to keep going sucked out of them. Because it's a performance. Mm-hmm. And for a performance, you need an audience. You need that engagement.
And that's why, as a writer, eventually, I wouldn't say it first, but eventually you need to get your work out there in some way, just to say, hey, someone read it, or someone could read it, and that inspires you a little bit. And that's why even submitting stories is a cool way to put yourself out there, because you know there's an audience. Even when someone rejects it, they've read something of that story. So it immediately shows you, oh, there's an audience for this story. And then when you get that first acceptance, you're like, oh, there's an audience for this. And that's why it's like going to an open mic, reading your work aloud. Just knowing that there's some place you can share your work is often enough to keep you going and inspiring you. And then when you know you have an audience, it's so fun to think, okay, I'm going to read this work here. And you think of those people, and that's very inspiring. It's like, okay, I can tailor it to them. I can think of what they would like.
Which is part of my goal with Forwrten, is to try and give people that audience when they're just starting out, or even if they're a big author that has a huge audience. I don't care one way or another. But it's to give them less of an echo chamber where they're in this void where they have no feedback, and give them something to engage with. Right. Because I feel like a lot more people would write, a lot more people would keep writing. God only knows how many authors are out there that are like the next William Shakespeare, the next George Lucas, what have you, who don't write at all because they don't have anything. Right. There's no engagement with it at all. And humans are social creatures, and it's kind of dirty to say that you're writing for other people, but you can't. I don't believe you really can write for yourself consistently, because it's about that interaction with others. Right. It's about creating a social interaction.
It's true. But really, it's also important to think about writing for yourself is also kind of like an illusion too, because when you're writing for yourself, you're writing for a reader. You like to read certain stuff. Yeah. So when you write for yourself, it's not so selfish. You're just writing for the kind of reader that you are. And you're the things that you like, probably someone else likes too. So I think if you really write for yourself as a reader, thinking this is the kind of book I want to read, then you're also writing for other people too. So you just have to keep that in mind. What's a book I really want to read? And you have to shape your story or your book towards that. And then you're not really just writing for yourself. You're just writing for all those kind of people.
So can you tell us about some of your novels and some of your short stories?
Yeah, so I break them in two. When I write short stories, I look at them as the most audience-friendly things I write. So when I write short stories, I try to really think of stories that people could connect with, because they're very short. You have to really get people into it. And those are the things I write to really submit, because every time I write a story, I submit it sometimes as much as 40 times until it lands somewhere. So I'm really always thinking when I write a story, who's going to read this? I think of what magazines I might send it to, what forums, where I might read it aloud. So I always think I'm hyper aware of this needs an audience. Now with novels, it's a little different, because I only really, like my stories, I write everything. I write modern stuff, fantasy stuff, science fiction stuff. I just try to be as commercial as possible. I try to go all over the place. With my novels, I only write novels in this tiny little fantasy world that I've created, where it has recurring characters. It's not like one novel, it's not like part 1, part 2, and part 3, but they're all set in the same world. And and I don't even care or think about who's going to read those. I just write it as the kind of book I would have wanted to read when I was 10 to 15. And that's all I do. And if no one reads it, I'm cool with it. And if no one publishes it, I have to be cool with it. So for me, my novels are where I get to really relax and be a kid again. and I don't have to worry about all the business of publishing. Whereas my stories are like, okay, these are meant to be published. So that's the big difference for me.
So you have one novel on Forwritten so far.
Right.
Let Sleeping Gods Lie. Could you tell me a little bit about that? Describe your story.
No, I don't remember. I wrote it a long time ago. I don't remember it. I mean, honestly, when you write a novel, so much happens in it, and until you reread it, you don't often remember. Like, I don't even remember some of the characters in it. But if I reread it, I'm like, oh, okay. But I do remember it. To me, it's what I like about that book. That is a book I started writing during the pandemic. It was like literally when school was like shoved online and all that stuff. I was, basically in quarantine more or less, and it just I needed something really to focus on rather than all the crazy stuff that was happening in the world. So I'm like, oh, I'm going to write a novel. So I had an idea for a novel, but I wanted to write it through the perspective of one of my characters that was a minor character in another book. I have a little person character. He's like a little person wizard, and he's like the apprentice to the main wizard that's in a lot of my books, and his name is Turld. And Turld is actually I took that name and some of his character from a medieval French poet who apparently really existed and wrote a great French epic. And there's a little picture of him there's a work called the Bayeux Tapestry, which is this giant, like mile-long tapestry that tells the story of the Battle of Hastings. And towards the end of it, there's a little person there. And he's one of the only people who is named in the whole tapestry. It names a few kings and a few popes, and then there's a little person, and over his name there's a little banner that says Turld. No one knows who the hell he is or why he was named. And I'm always fascinated by that. And a lot of people say he was probably like a court poet, and he probably wrote some of the great epics of that time. So I wanted to make him a character. So in my world, I just made him a magician, right? Mm-hmm. So, but he's always been kind of like a minor character. And obviously I relate to him because even though I'm not a little person, I'm not far off, right? So I always thought I wanted to make a little person like the hero of one of my stories. But and so I thought, wouldn't it be cool to tell a story from his perspective? Because he has so many limitations. No one takes him seriously. It's going to be hard to have a love interest because they're not going to take him seriously. So many of the things that you would normally have in a book, you don't have with him. He has to fight for them a little bit more. So I thought it would have so much drama built in, and I just relate to him so well. So that's what I love about that book. It's a book literally about him from his perspective, and it was like a love letter to this minor character that I had. I'm like, I'm going to give him his story. So I've always really liked that novel, even though I haven't reread it recently. I always liked it because it was just really, it was only focused on him. My other novels have like a cast of characters, and like a few chapters are with this person, a few chapters with this person. Even though it's in third person, it never leaves him. It's all about him, and it's only what he sees and he experiences. And that was new for me because I like kind of head hopping. I like moving to different people. The challenge for this book is this has to only be Turld. You don't talk about anyone else. It's only what he sees. And that gave me the courage to write my next novel, which I just finished this summer, where it's first person. It's the only novel I've ever written in first person from, obviously, a young person's perspective. So that book helped me. It freed me up. It's something I'd never tried before. So that's why I like that book.
So you're more comfortable with third person, but like omniscient third person, yes, where you flip between different brains.
That's what I used to do. I used to do super omniscient, where I knew everything. I've become more interested in limited third person on like one character, because it's sometimes cheating to know too much. Like it just seems like, you lose some of the drama if the narrator knows too much, because then it's like, I'm withholding this on purpose. It's more interesting if even the narrator doesn't know. And that's why in my stories I actually write a lot of first person. So I've become more interested in limited third person and first person, because it builds in so much drama and so much limitation. So so I like that more and more. In fact, I don't write super omniscient almost anymore now.
I'm a fan of writing first person because I like having distinct characters, and I feel like being able to see directly into their head and how they view things gives you because then you can play with perspective a lot.
Right.
Like in the novel that I wrote, the main character is not supposed... He's trustworthy to a degree.
Right.
Because he has a very distinct personality. He's very cynical. So there are situations he enters very cynically that aren't actually as cynical as they may appear.
Right.
But you have to kind of infer that from what's going on.
Oh, completely, yeah.
And so it becomes kind of a conversation between the reader and the main character where you get to see all these different, like, differences in his perspective compared to reality. Which I think those are very interesting to write. And very hard. Possibly above my skill level.
Well, it's hard because... In a way, it's easier to write first person because it makes you really identify with the character and you're limited to what the character can see. But you have to really make that character real. Because if it just becomes you're using I pronouns, but we don't really get to see inside the character, then it falls apart. Yeah. So we have to really believe that the person talking is a real character. And it's hard to flesh out a character when they're talking about themselves. It's easier to tell. As a third person can describe them, they can say, oh, they have these issues, and oh, here we go. First person, if you're talking about yourself, you often don't know what your problems are, right? And you don't want to talk about them. So how do you develop a character if the character can't talk about their problems, right? Yeah. So you have to be really skillful in doing that.
It all comes down to utilization.
Yeah.
Will first person enhance the experience of this novel, or will third person omniscient enhance the experience of this novel? It's all about how you use your toolbox when it comes to writing. And pacing is the same way.
Yep.
There are scenes that require fast pacing to keep a reader engaged, but you don't want to have a fast paced situation where the main character is sitting on the couch eating food, talking to their best friend, because it's tonal shock. And so it's all about the toolbox. You have all these different tools in writing, and you have to know when to use each of them in each specific scenario, which I think is very difficult for first-time writers.
Yes.
I'm sure that you've seen and experienced. Well, not to breach into an insensitive topic.
Yeah, right.
Do you think that your height affects the way that your students perceive you?
Oh, sure. I mean, well, here's a good example. For example, one of my great colleagues in the department is Dr. Hayda. And Dr. Hayda is, taller, bigger than I am. So people, when they first walk into his class, they might think, oh, gosh, he looks scary. I might have to do this. And, of course, they realize he's a great professor. But first impressions can leave lasting impressions, especially if you don't try to combat them. So he often has to work against that. He has to show, look, I'm not some scary person, blah, blah, blah. But no one is intimidated by me. In fact, it's the opposite. Either people feel very comfortable with me, or they just don't take me seriously. So I think in a way, as a teacher, it helps me ingratiate myself to the students because they're immediately not threatened by me. So it's something you can start at a good place with that, right? But you do have to make them think that you're actually competent. Because there are people, it's amazing, especially when I didn't have my beard, when I looked at even a little younger, and especially when I was younger, some people thought I was too young to teach because they I didn't look old and I was short, so they assumed I was almost a kid. And I remember one guy, he was a vet and he was a bit older, and he refused to do anything for me. He literally said, I want a real teacher. Yeah. Wow. And it took me all semester to convince him that I actually was a real teacher.
Well, yeah, what makes you not a real teacher?
But a lot of people here, it's interesting because the average person, let's say in Ada, right, the average guy is a little taller, right, than someone like me. So people really still read a lot of stereotypical ideas about size. And I'm, in general, not taken as seriously sometimes because I'm smaller. So it's something I have to work with a little bit. And that's what's good about writing, is no one knows how tall or short I am.
Well, until they hear this podcast.
Exactly, right.
Do you think that predisposition towards judging people based on size is like a cultural thing around this region, or more of an innate human thing?
It's probably innate, but in some parts of the world, like other places I've lived, I wasn't that abnormal. I mean, I was short, but there's a lot of short people. Here, I stand out a lot more. I mean, there's almost there's very few guys who are my size. Most people are like you, much taller. So it is kind of cultural there. And I think a lot of people assume smallness with, weakness, but also childishness, right? You can't be smart. You can't be this, you can't be that, because otherwise you wouldn't be so short. I mean, there are people who I can tell they really think that. And it's insane, but it's something to deal with. But on the other hand, a lot of people will feel comfortable with me immediately, and then that's good too. Yeah. So there's bad and good. Yeah.
He said I'm much taller. For the record, I'm 7'5", giant horns on my head, right. Long flowing mane. So tell me, what do you think of Forwrten.com? Describe your experience with it in your own words.
Right. Well, I think it's great because, especially for first-time writers, it's a great way to get their stuff on a professional-looking site that they can share with other people. Because, like, a lot of people have this homemade website, or they just put their stuff on some weird page, and they're like, look, here's my writing. And if someone looks at that, they're like, it just looks amateurish, right? So Forwrten doesn't look amateurish. It looks real. It looks sophisticated. It looks polished. So if you put your writing there, and first of all, you're with a bunch of other writers of all kinds of different experiences and skill levels. So it gives some pedigree. It gives some validation to your work right off the bat. And it's just a nice place to direct people. Look, here's my work. No one's going to go to Forwrten and go, what the hell is this? They're going to go, oh, interesting, you know? So I think especially any writer, but especially a first-time writer, needs somewhere to perch. And that's what's so great about it. It's somewhere they can land and say, I'm going to live here for a while, and I'm going to share my work from here. So that's what I like about it. And that's why I wanted to participate, because I want to help all these other writers. But also, I want a place to say, oh, look, my writing's here too. Because I used to have sites that I used, writing sites, and I've left all of them because they all of them became like just really kind of commercial and in a bad way. Like they weren't really representing the writers. They were just trying to sell something, always trying to sell something that had nothing to do with the writing. Yeah. And now Forwrten is all about the writers.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you're working on right now? Anything that you're trying to promote? Any writing that you're doing?
I mean, there's nothing specifically I'm trying to promote. I've got I've got a story that's coming out this month in a magazine called Midwest Weird, right? About weird Midwestern stories. So, but that's not out yet. So I have stories here and there, and I've got a novel that I finished last summer that I'm still revising and cleaning up. And I'll either I'm going to send it a few places. Probably, inevitably, it'll go nowhere. I've got a few smaller presses I'm going to send it to. So when that happens, I'll just put it somewhere. I might put it on Forwrten. I might even self-publish it again. Who knows? Because I self-published all my other novels only because I just wanted to have them somewhere. And like Amazon is an easy place to have things on. People go to Amazon. So I just like having my novels somewhere so someone could read them. And I just, again, I want to have them perched somewhere. Yeah. So if I can't get them published, I want to put them somewhere. Yeah. So I'd rather put it on Forwrten than Amazon because I hate Amazon. But it's just, it's just what you have to use. So we just need a place to put stuff. Because I don't care if my novels make money. They don't need to. But I would just like them to be accessible to someone. I'd like to say, look, here's my books.
Yeah, it's that what I was talking about earlier. You don't want to live in a void.
Right.
Life is about people. A large part of it anyway. And so you want to be able to show people what you've done.
Yep.
Well, it has been a nice talk, and I hope that you've enjoyed it. I certainly have. And this closes episode 2 of Forwritten Fruit.